Hi, I'm Michael Hartman.
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo. And this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all those Mo Pros out there. I am your host, Michael Hartman, flying solo today, at least for the near term. But I am not alone totally. I am joined today by Stefano Mazzalai, a marketing technology and operations professional with 10 plus years of experience in B2B SaaS products. Stefano is currently Director of Go-to-Market Data Strategy and Governance at Demandbase. Prior to joining Demandbase, he held marketing operations leadership roles at several different companies. Before he made the move to marketing ops, he led marketing at 2 different companies, and his early career was actually in engineering development. So, Stefano, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Michael, for having me here.
Yeah. I know I tried multiple times before we started recording to get your name right. Did I get close?
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, so Stefano, I did a very, I'm not even sure it's a quick run through, but a quick run through of your career up to this point. One of the things that we find interesting is that there doesn't seem to be one career path that gets people into marketing operations, and your story is really no different to that. That said, you do have a bit of an eclectic background, starting as an engineer and then moving to marketing and then marketing operations. So maybe if you could share a little more about your career journey. And I'm always curious about pivotal moments, like a decision you made where your career, you feel like if you look back on it, like that was a key decision or a key person that changed the trajectory of my career. If you could walk us through that, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Michael. And definitely a great question. I definitely agree on the multiple paths to marketing operations career in general. I think there's not one unique way to get there for everyone. I think from my specific case, I used to be, I think, a bit of a math nerd back in high school. So I really enjoyed that. I was going to go for something like math or physics back in college, but then I guess I opted to do to study mechanical engineering because I saw more maybe more real world applications after that. It's just in hindsight, maybe I'm not sure if it was the best decision, but I think at the time it felt pretty true. So I studied mechanical engineering, and while I think graduating, I had the chance also to do some pretty interesting thesis on numerical simulation of some manufacturing processes. So basically, trying to understand basically how a ring will deform under very extreme heat and pressure, and predicts basically its final shape using some numerical algorithm. And back at the time, we even used some rudimental AI to perform this. So the neural networks, I think, have been around for 10, 15 years. Then we're talking about mid 2000s. And the problem was that at the time, both the computing power and also especially the training data was somehow lacking. So they were giving some approximate answers. You have to run all those simulation on your local machines. It will take forever to do it. You could so I think it was definitely a different experience all in all. But I think I got my hands dirty into those kind of computation. You have to book, set up the simulations pretty carefully to avoid blocking a machine for weeks or so. And so we also had some cluster machines available, but those were a bit tougher to book in general. So we had to book them well in advance and all of that. But so yeah, I think that was my initial foray into numerical simulation. I had the chance to, I got really into that. So I was looking for a job into that specific industry. I found one in Livermore, California, in the East Bay, which at a company that was doing software development, eventually was acquired by ANSYS. And I spent there about 5 years working on simulation data, assisting customers and basically QAing some of the data that we had here. So it was a really enjoyed my time there. I think we got exposed to a bunch of different simulation things, like especially in aerospace, like burst strike simulation, things like fan blade out, understanding how maybe the engine needs to be dimensioned in a way that would absorb the impact of such like high speed like impacts in general. And so like things also like commercially, like how to study the like drop test of like commercial detergents or something like that. So anything that would, any kind of simulation or object that would change shape very, very dramatically in a very short amount of time. So things were going well. I think I stayed there for like 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, I was kind of like feeling ready for a new challenge somehow. I was learning a bit less every day, felt busy, but at the same time a bit bored in some ways. And so that's, I think that's what gave me a bit the incipit of like doing like an MBA to broaden my business horizon, learning a bit more leaning into more the dark side of business in some ways, right? So I think I did an MBA, came back like studying, like working in the same industry for a while, and I picked up marketing more as an intuition. I think first of all, something that I thought was I would enjoy it. So I tried doing different things in marketing for like about like 2 years. So things from like PMMs to like events to like brand, digital, a little bit of everything in some ways. And we were also kind of like bootstrapping like a small startup back at the time. So there was a lot of things going on at once. But I think that experience was very valuable to me because it also gave me the foundation to relate better to marketers in general in the future, in my future job. But however, during those 2 years, I think I realized how I was always driven, kind of like was always seeking the analytical part of marketing, more on the upside. There was no marketing operations, I guess, official tag job description back at the time. We're talking about 2013, 14 or so. So I was just taking maybe courses online, things like around like data analytics, like some web development, machine learning stuff, all of those things that, so in hindsight, I don't think one definitely needed an MBA to get into marketing operations, but at the same time, I think if you come from like very technical niche backgrounds like mine, I think it might make sense to just kind of like broaden your horizon overall.
Yeah.
But most, I mean, it was to answer your question, I think most of my experience as marketing ops and business operations in general has been at Instapage, which is a company that where I stayed around 4.5 years and kind of like pivoted from B2C to B2B while I stayed there. And I would say like I had the chance to work from multiple areas of the business, from business intelligence to lifecycle marketing to marketing campaigns, sales ops, pretty much everything. And so I definitely appreciated like the aspect of like getting first-hand experience in implementing things from like scratch overall. So
yeah, that's interesting to me. I was sitting here nodding my head and smiling, especially about your educational background, because I also was in an engineering school. Now, my friends who were electrical engineers and mechanical engineers would call me a pseudo engineer because I was in what the graduate program would be called operations research, right? So sort of an offshoot of industrial engineering. But it's all about, like, I did a simulation project my senior year, right, of a factory floor, but it was more of like the automation, right? The thing that would move, the robot, early days of a robot that would move around. So it was a demo space. And so every time, this was back when it's pre-Accenture, as Anderson Consulting, they had a space, and every time that they had a client that they were going to do a demo with, they would call me and my partner, and we would go down with stopwatches, and we were timing stuff, and then we built a simulation of it, right? So a little different than the kind of simulation you did. Yeah. But I think that like you, right, I think that idea of understanding how these things work, understanding that there's can be variances, and that there's back then I wouldn't have been able to articulate, but like that the world's full of trade-offs, right? You know, right. So I'm sure in your space, which comes, I think, is a lot of what we deal with in marketing operations, right? There's
Absolutely. Yeah.
as being kind of a guide. Well, that's interesting. I'm always, it sounds like and like you, I didn't go back and get my MBA, but I believe that broadened experience also, our longtime listeners here know that I'm a big believer in understanding finance, understanding statistics, understanding some of those things that may not be day-to-day core to what you do, but it's serves you well to the point where I have teenage boys and one who already finished his high school math requirements coming into his senior year. And I told him, like, go take, like, they have an agreement with the local community college. And I said, you should take a statistics class. And that's what he's taking right now as part of his senior year. And then I'm like, go take a finance class too, right? If you can do it.
Yeah.
Because I think those are valuable down the road, no matter what you do almost. So one of the things it sounds like, you kind of learned along the way, whether it was through the combination of your own experience plus the MBA, is that you have an ability to translate between marketing and engineering or marketing and technical people. Can you maybe go a little deeper? Like, what did you mean by that? And if you have any examples, like, of where you've had to help bridge that gap between those two audiences.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think, maybe I don't pretend I have that ability completely figured out, but I think it's just that what I probably meant, I think it was, I can zoom in pretty easily into a technical problem based on specific, like, business requirements. So I'm pretty fast in translating those requirements into technical specifications overall. So I think this came out in multiple projects through my career. So, like, understanding, like, first of all, the voice of the marketing team and interacting with both them, either marketing or sales or other stakeholders, and based on our own law, not just my own, but within the team, like, the knowledge of the limitations of each technology that we deal with on an everyday basis. We kind of, like, we can match those capabilities with the sort of, like, with the top-down business requirements that we receive, right? So I think that's always served me well overall in all the through the years, and I think overall, I think the flip side of that is also very important, obviously. So, like, one says to not only being able to zoom in into a problem, but also the ability to kind of, like, abstract and, like, zoom out in some ways to from the details to get the larger picture, which I think is something that maybe comes a bit less naturally for engineers in general, just because they have a more their mindset is more like take the broader problem, breaking down into as many possible subset, and just tackle each one one by one, right? But I do think, however, that that's the zoom out part can definitely be taught, and just something that I focus also a lot on my own learning in these last few years around that, and I think it's super valuable if you want to get into really a more, like, strategic mindset and all of that. So I think both of them are valuable, and I think they should be. I see them as necessary and complementary for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I have a similar mindset. Do you find that helps you? I think one of the challenges a lot of people who are listening would say they've experienced is they feel like they go to one of two extremes, right? They either get a request that is one that, as they understand it, requires, I'll call it, heroic efforts to make happen, and they go through that heroic effort and they enable it, and then people are like, okay, the next time they're going to just ask for more, right? And then they feel like they can't push back, or they go to the other side where it's just they say that request is stupid, or you can't be done, technology doesn't do it. And what I've found is there's a medium place that you have to learn to negotiate with, like, what is it that they're really trying to accomplish when they come to the request? And can you find a way to get them close or a step in the direction towards it? Do you find like your experience has enabled you to have those kind of conversations, or am I the only, like, is it just my own sort of crazy mind where I'm thinking about that?
No, yeah, no, I definitely agree on the necessity for like a compromise in general, and being able to just, obviously, try to make our internal customers as happy as possible, and just being able to really focus on their own problems. So like, all in all, we know the limitations of our tools, but also we have ways to obviously bypass them, maybe using some ways to like do some like custom integrations, or like way that like using some like layers of technologies that can kind of like overcome the limitation of each individual tool, I would say, themselves. So I think it's important to kind of just blend these two together and just being able to come up with a solution that makes sense. Yeah.
For sure. No, like what that always I feel like that leads to is a fragile tech ecosystem. When you start doing those workarounds. Mm-hmm. So I, as much as anything, I want to try to avoid that. I'm big on simplicity where we can. Yeah. So another thing you talked about when you walked through your background is that you worked both in a B2C and B2B. I don't have any hard data on this, but I would venture to guess the majority of our listeners, and certainly the majority of our guests, are more B2B marketing and marketing ops folks. Since you've worked in both worlds, my first foray into marketing was in a B2C world. But what was your experience like? What do you see as the big differences between those two worlds in a general sense?
Yeah. No, I think definitely the difference is quite big, although I feel like over the last few years, things have been like converging together, and like each field is kind of learning from one another. So I think from B2C, I think definitely the focus has always been more on the speed of execution and scale, and the more obviously focus on the individual record. While B2B has been more around obviously account-based transactions, like slower velocity and like longer like sales cycle, like not just matter of like days, but it's matter of like months. So that's a big difference. So I think like adapting is I think the two systems, the two frameworks are very different. So it takes a little bit to adapt from one to the other. I would say from a data perspective, I think if you come from B2C, you are a bit spoiled. So you have a wealth of like behavioral data usually at your hand, and you can think that you can personalize pretty much everything until you get to B2B, where you say, hey, wait a second, you have to you have to definitely make some trade-offs. You don't have all that data available in real time. It becomes a bit more difficult, right? So, but at the same time, so and the thing with B2C, I also think it can become a bit addicting the way that you can run campaigns. So, like I think you see the effects, the end results of your campaigns pretty much immediately. So that's also very, very, I would say, compelling. So you can see immediately the impact that you had, and just and sometimes you tend also probably to overestimate your capabilities in that sense, because you draw some causation maybe when it's not there. Maybe it's more like correlation between things. So understanding what really makes the difference, I think, is a bit difficult to do. But I think. I think the two are definitely different. I think they are converging together. So I think and I think that's the best part of that. So you can actually you can learn multiple things from both, and just be informed of like taking the best from both worlds.
It's interesting because I tend to agree with you on all that. I think the volume and the pace, which I'm sure will be surprising to people in B2B world who feel like their pace is as fast as it can be. But I think also you're talking about the pace at which you deploy, get feedback, right? As opposed to we're deploying and deploying and deploying. Hopefully we're getting feedback in the B2B world in a reasonable amount of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I remember, so in the B2C world, complexity to me was always in the volume of data, especially in at the time when I was doing that, where the technology really struggled with that kind of volume of data. Mm-hmm. And so like I actually outsourced a bunch to a third party that had a bunch of mainframes, and they did monthly updates and quarterly refreshes on our demographics and all that. And they did our householding, which is sort of the an equivalent of say lead to account matching, right? That you would have in a B2B world. Yeah. And even that was relatively straightforward. It's a pretty well-known thing, lots of standard ways of doing it. I think B2B is much more complicated, not only because you've got these more complicated structures and relationships between the people and the organizations and entities, but also because on your outbound stuff, you actually usually on B2C, there's rarely a salesperson, right? So it's almost always either direct, or if you're, say, a CPG company, you're doing promotional activity, and then the activity happens at a retailer, right? So you don't have that. Whereas in B2B, you've got the extra added complexity of you've got to build pipeline, you get we call it lead generation or lead, demand generation, whichever term you want to use, that ultimately leads to a salesperson getting involved, and there's that process. And they're not really, I was going to say not trained or don't care, but like they're not compensated on data quality, for example, right? Generally speaking. Right. And so it leads to a whole different set of complexities that are different than volume, but I think equally as challenging or interesting. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Things like, things like you should never, I think, assume that someone within your sales team is going to like help you in adding data or so you should start like always considering the worst case scenario and just like putting up using technology in order to make up for some of those like data deficits.
Yep. So wanted to get into a little bit of your role at Demandbase, and I think so. If I understand it right, your role at Demandbase is focused on how to leverage data from your go-to-market activities. So broadly, marketing, sales, maybe customer success, maybe product data, and that you're then building things out for data quality and governance and things like that. But what is it like? What are some of the things you're doing, and like what does that mean to you? Like what does data governance and data quality mean to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great question. I think I think on one hand we have these last few years we have this like proliferation of data. So like we have ways to like capture data pretty much everywhere. So like things from like systems that can record like all this raw data in multiple systems. So there's like the problem there is like, it's kind of a blessing and a curse at both times, right? So you have a blessing because you have the ability of like extract information from that, extract insights, do even predictions, whatever you need. But that is really the enabler for that to happen going forward. At the same time, the curse is that there are multiple ways that those data can be you have to assess the accuracy of that data. You have to make sure that data is not hindering the functioning of all your system. It needs to be like governed in some ways, right? So there's a lot of potential, both like good things that can happen from data and bad things overall, right? So like avoid all things like garbage in, garbage out sort of situation. So I think my role specifically at Demandbase is really like fixing the sources of like bad data first, I would say. That can be either the quality, I would say, of a specific data source or the process that like move that data around. So like, because, those kind of processes, if left unattended, they can create relevant overhead on the systems that are connecting the data together. And like generating things like, a lot of like timeouts, 500 internal errors, that kind of stuff, affecting also data storage in your CRM or like on other databases, and even like preventing users from like accessing the UI in the most extreme cases.
May I interrupt you a little bit. So I buy into all that it's important for all those reasons. How do you identify when there's that kind of data quality issue?
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of marketingops.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At marketingops.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
I think there's setting up like specific like monitoring systems is sort of key. So like understanding like what is the percentage of utilization of a certain platform, understanding like what is the, what are the thresholds, the limits that we are understanding, like how we are approaching those limits, and having some sort of like general understanding of where we are for it, be your CRM or be other like integrations to that is always important. And overall, like setting up, letting every stakeholders that are governing, because obviously as a team we set up like some guidelines, but there are like also specific teams that maybe are the specific admins for that platform. So like setting up recommendations for like how to handle API calls, for example, like what kind of volume we should expect, or like where what kind of limits we should not touch, and so forth. And some of them are like built into the platform. Some others, they need to be more like we need to be more like descriptive in like making sure that everything works together well. But I think it's we try to give as much guidance as possible in that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the reason I asked that, because I'm a big believer. Let me back up a little bit. When it comes to like reporting and analytics, and everyone who's listening has been asked to do some reporting and analytics, some more than others. And very often I hear people say, our data's crap, like we can't trust our reporting. But I'm of the opinion that you should start doing reporting. Even if you know or think that your data is not, I don't even like to use the word right, but your data is not where you want it to be. It's not as good as it could be, because that will help you identify where there are issues or gaps, and then help you identify like how do you resolve those. So are you finding some of that same thing? Are you using reporting and analytics, or are you doing monitoring of systems and interactions, or both, or maybe something else completely different?
Using both. I think we have some systems in place for more on the, I would say like monitoring some of the system metrics, and some others more like around the database health and database points specifically. So we use mostly like reporting from multiple sources for that purpose. And again, I think, as you said, I think there's the possibility of I would say assessing the quality of each data source is very it's very important to use reporting in that regard. So like incrementally understanding where, if the data that we're using makes sense. Also like crafting some new, I would say, like a data glossary overall for the team to use, so everyone is like aligned of the specific definitions, and like and when you introduce some new data points, always making sure that you can triangulate also those data points across multiple sources to make sure that is relevant and the results make sense for your business and for your use case overall. But I think it's I think it's super important.
I think that documenting the definition and or calculations for data points is really, really important, because what that helps you do is, if say there's reporting and someone's questioning the result of a report on a data point, you end up spending time not arguing about whether or not it's right or wrong, but whether or not the definition is right. And like the definition can be changed, right, over time, right? You don't want to do that all that often, but it becomes one about like, this is the way we defined it. We could argue about whether or not that definition is the one that we all agree to, or maybe we need a secondary one, right? That whatever that may be, and it gets you out of this like, is it quote right or not right? Do you have that? Have you had experience with that kind of stuff as well?
I think that's definitely super important. I think, and that's something that for our own metrics, it's a work in progress across different teams. So like making sure that we align on those definitions, making sure that we can those are like, and we know how long some of those definitions are valid for as well. Can it be like for like a fiscal year? Can be even for last time. But just I think everyone needs to find an agreement until that data is no longer be considered like fresh or like needs to be updated. But I think it's a work in progress all the time for sure.
Yeah. Another point of saying like, don't wait until you think everything is right. You can start without having all that, because it can be changed over time. So I think you hinted at this, but I think most people listening again would say they know that they would agree data quality is important. At the same time, they either don't have a team like yours, or they don't have the bandwidth to spend on sort of the behind the scenes data quality, but you do. So it's great. So if they could learn from your experience a little bit, how have you structured your data quality, data governance? I don't even want to say team, but the way you've implemented it there, do you have a more centralized team that manages all this stuff? Do you have one that's decentralized where there's only small people at the center, or is it some hybrid of that?
That's a great question. I think we try to follow more like a hybrid approach whenever we can, I think, in general. So I think it's trying to get the best of both worlds in general. So like striking like some balance between the standardizing things at the central level and like giving autonomy to like different teams to like have some agency to make changes for their own needs, right? So and that also can also change depending on the phase of the implementation. So we tend to be a bit more, I think, like centralized during like the initial deployment phase, and then we allow over time to become a bit, to decentralize the model a little bit. So like it ends up generally in a hybrid mode most of the time, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have done multiple implementation in that sense, both like for using like Salesforce integrations and things like automation platform and such. So I think we tend to see that as giving some of the best results so far. But
do you have I don't even know what the right, but say a committee that helps you with prioritizing those efforts and maybe helping to decide on that, or that are maybe not directly reporting to you, but are stakeholders from other departments?
We it's still in its infancy, but we started off like data governance, like executive committee starting like in the last few months. So like it's something, the idea here is like really to not only like prioritizing initiatives, but like then deciding some like kind of like like helping to just reduce some of the technical, like the technology overlap that we might have across different platforms, but also making some of these decisions. So like where it makes sense to have like more centralization versus less centralizations, and just being able to adopt that. So I think this is something that we also offer to our customers, this kind of like guidance, but it's something that we started implementing ourselves most recently. And so far, I think, so far it's been definitely been helpful. It just, it needs, obviously, it integrates with your own cadence and in terms of like,
Sure.
Overall processes and all of that. And I think it's beneficial to all parties for sure.
Gotcha. Sorry, this just popped into my head. So this is coming at you out of left field. Who do you report into? What's your reporting structure?
Yeah. So I think I used to actually be part of marketing operations until last year. So I think now my team is actually is reporting into business and systems technology, and which rolls up into revenue operations and ultimately to the CFO under. So I'm in the finance team. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, so that's interesting that the revenue operations rolls up to CFO. I actually like to hear that.
Seems to be a trend. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a trend, but I think it's a more appropriate place than either a head of sales or head of marketing or even a CRO if you have that. But that could be in fact, that has been a whole topic for one of these episodes before. So, so let's taking a step back, right? As I said, I don't think most people have this kind of team in place to really focus on data quality. Mm-hmm. How was that idea pitched? Were you part of pitching the idea that we could do this, and then getting the resources allocated, both allocating budget, dollars, technology, and people to make this a priority? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think this is. I think I really like overall. I think my former manager, definition of data quality, I would say, as a team sport, meaning that I think since I don't think any single individual has enough knowledge across multiple domains to assess data quality overall. So it's just simply impossible. And thinking about things like the sales team, where there are cases where they have a lot of inner knowledge about the functioning of certain accounts, who has buying power across business units, for examples, who are the main stakeholders and all of that. So I think it's really hard for one single person to drive the conversation, right? So I think it's very important to keep very, really close feedback loop with your sales team in B2B in general to get feedback about the quality of your data, I would say. And so I think one of the key things that we implemented at Demandbase in the last couple of years has been really a ticketing system for collecting feedback about all our data problems. So things like missing data, things like inaccurate data across records, account hierarchies, duplicate records, all of that. So I think that data collection part has been really the building block to build the case to get more resources around data quality. I think both in terms of people and both in terms of tools. So I think that's how we started the conversation, right? With in terms of allocating new budget around that. So I think, and you can and it's really, I think, despite the most obvious impact of these initiatives, you can see also the immediate ripple effect with things like territory planning, lead routing, and all of that, because obviously you need to plan for those across with your data quality, because technically it would be nice to have data changes always happening in real time, but that can also affect greatly some of these things like account assignments or lead routing, as I mentioned. So there needs to be a process that really includes them in the picture as well.
Sure.
And but yeah, so I think in general, we've seen really good results with this system, and just we were able to kind of just assign both like more like headcount and more like new technologies dedicated to solving these issues. So I think it's I think I can definitely advocate for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you hinted at this maybe, but you say the results have been good. How this is something I would struggle with, and I think a lot of our listeners would too, is how do you measure the impact of this kind of work, data quality, data governance?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think there's multiple ways to do it. I would say, like, first of all, like being able to build like kind of like always on, like some like self-serve like dashboards that are focused on specific channels that everyone can access to see the performance for these data quality initiatives, like how many what is the lift in terms of like fill rate for specific account fields, or like things like I would say like what is the fill rate for like how many new contacts have been created for specific executives and so forth, and making sure that overall we're able to like always update the field with like wherever they meet. So I think we have like things like sales and marketing cafes where people informally talk about marketing metrics, or like sending out email newsletter on a weekly or monthly basis where we always update some of these metrics and let the team know. So it needs to be kind of like very deliberate and like upfront in terms of like making sure that we track those results and let the team know about them as well. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I think we'll maybe get into one, maybe two more questions here, and then we'll have to wrap up. But we're recording this in October, late-ish October 2024. So planning for 2025 is either happening or soon to be happening for many people. Thinking about both your marketing ops and your data governance roles, right? How do you, I think people have struggled with this as I have. How do you measure, or do you have any recommendations for how people should measure marketing operations at their organizations?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think I think everything should really, ideally should really start from using like, from an OKR perspective. So like understanding like, ideally you should have some company level OKRs that start from the top down and just propagates across the team. So like any team unit, I would say unit and team OKRs should be aligned with the overall company ones and broken down into milestones in that sense. And then in that framework, then all the general pillars of marketing ops would also self-align with those KRs in general, which are also very, KRs by definition, they are very quantifiable. So I think you can add into those things like, a number of MQL and QAs generated for each, from our campaigns, for like specifically for the campaign ops team, things like, the database metric health for the data ops team, things like more like accuracy of forecasting, for example, from the analytics team, and kind of like blend them all together into like an aggregate metric that rolls up to the RevOps team overall. So I think it's kind of like I like to see them all like kind of like aligned together in that sense. But and I think especially at the beginning of a new fiscal year, it makes sense to take your time and just kind of like plan out these KRs for the whole year along with all the milestones. And it's something that maybe might be a bit of a not a perfect process. You might have to like revise some of those metrics on the fly, like during the year. But I think it's well worth the effort to make sure that you are aligned with your overall company goals and overall just like it makes for like more like overall like integrated collaboration across the teams.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I take away from that is several things that I would agree with. One is making sure you understand that how what you're doing aligns with company goals, right? How that ladders up directly, indirectly, right? I think keeping that in mind is important. The second being, you mentioned things that are measurable, and I think that's a really that sometimes gets missed, right? I think people feel like that it's a little squishy, hard to measure what we do. I think there are ways to do it, and you mentioned milestones and milestones towards certain goals that are maybe not as quantifiable, but at least you can show progress, right? I think there's ways to do that. The other one that I would add, and this is more for me, having led teams and coached people, I think it's easy to start coming up with 8, 9, 10 major goals or metrics that you want to measure yourself against, and I think that's a mistake, right? I mean, you could focus on the 3, 4, maybe 5 that are most likely to have an impact on the overall company goals, right? I think that's an important piece too. Do you have a similar philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's endless possibilities of I think getting lost in some, I would say, maybe optimization that maybe makes sense for your team, but then they are not aligned with what the company is doing. Might be even detrimental on the long run. So you have to be extremely careful in the planning phase to make sure that those are aligned to begin with. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, great. Well, so Stefano, we've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure our audience heard from or could learn from you?
No, I think this is great. I think I really enjoyed the discussion so far, and then I think I'm definitely happy to provide more insights if someone wants to contact me.
Perfect. Well, that leads me into my very last question for you, which is if folks want to connect with you or learn from you or hear more about how you think about this stuff, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think using LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn handle is just first and last name Stefano Mazzalai. I think that would be it. Perfect.
All right, there's how you pronounce it. So
no, I think he did great. Yeah.
Well, great, Stefano. This was a lot of fun. I know I walked away from this learning some things. I think I even wrote a white paper for the Marketing Upstock community this past year about how to measure B2B marketing effectiveness, and I had a whole portion of it on what I call operational data and the importance of it, and having a plan on how to make that better. And so I think we touched on a number of things there, and I think it's all good. Thank you, Stefano. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for all of our listeners out there to continue to support us, as always. If you have suggestions for topics or guests or want to be a guest, reach out to me, Mike Rizzo, or Naomi Liu, and we would be happy to talk to you about that in more detail. Until next time, bye, everybody.